Christ is risen. Christos anesti. I hope you're all doing well this Friday of Bright or Renewal Week. Today, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite saints' lives. Her life really embodies our hope in the resurrection, which we have been celebrating all week. Her life is rather unique, marked by a lot of unique and unusual details. She was a modern saint, royalty, rich, famous, a convert to orthodoxy, described as the most beautiful woman of her time, helped the poor, married against her family's wishes, started a monastery, gave up her royal position, became a nun, and died a martyr's death. And through all of this, embodied our hope in the resurrection. I am speaking about St. Elizabeth, the Grand Duchess. Let's take a look. St. Elizabeth was born in 1864 into a royal German family. Her father was a Grand Duke in the German Empire in the Grand Duchy of Hesse. Her mother was Princess Alice of Great Britain. Her grandmother was the famous Queen Victoria of Great Britain. Although royalty and rich, she grew up with simplicity. She and the other children would clean their own rooms and cook for themselves. She and her parents, as pious Lutherans, would help the poor a lot. Her mother would go into town and give to the poor and visit the sick in the town hospital. She would go with her mother and sometimes tire of these charitable works as a child. But her mother would remind her about the joy she would bring to the poor. When Elizabeth was 14, her mother died young. Elizabeth was sad, but she had the hope of the resurrection and took care of her younger brother and sisters. The rest of her life, she loved to help the poor and orphans. Elizabeth grew into a beautiful woman. She was kind and gentle, but also pretty physically. She had many suitors. Among the list of royalty that wanted to marry her were Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, the future Kaiser during World War I, Lord Charles Montagu, the second son of the 7th Duke of Manchester, the future Frederick II, Grand Duke of Baden, whose marriage proposal she declined to the great disappointment of her grandmother, Queen Victoria. Finally, Elizabeth met a Russian duke named Sergei at a ball at the age of 15. Although she knew him as a child, at first he didn't make a good impression on her. But after the death of Sergei's parents, within a year of each other, Elizabeth sympathized with Sergei because she had felt this same grief after the death of her mother. They found some common interests, and at the age of 20, when he had proposed to Elizabeth a second time, she married the Duke. At first, her grandmother, the Queen, and was against the marriage, but they did eventually receive her approval and her father's approval, and they married in 1884. Elizabeth was still a Lutheran when she married the Duke, but she was interested in Orthodox liturgy and history. Eventually, she would read about the Orthodox Church. In the 4th year of their marriage, they took a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and they visited Bethlehem, Mount Tabor, Nazareth, and Jerusalem. There they attended the consecration of the Russian Orthodox Church of St. Mary Magdalene, located in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the same church that holds her relics today. She wrote to her grandmother, Queen Victoria, quote, "It is like a dream to see all these places where our Lord suffered for us, and such intense comfort to have been able to come to Jerusalem." Elizabeth longed to be Orthodox too. She would see her husband receive Holy Communion with such great joy and hear his shouts of "Christ is risen" on Easter, and knew she was missing something. Elizabeth was chrismated into the Orthodox Church to the great joy of her husband after their return from their pilgrimage in 1891. She continued to help the poor a lot as Grand Duchess. Tragically, when St. Elizabeth was 40 years old, her husband, the Grand Duke, was assassinated by a socialist revolutionary. She faced her husband's murderer in jail, saying, "I'll ask the emperor to pardon you, and I'll pray to God that he will forgive you. I myself have already forgiven you." Elizabeth's hope in the resurrection was so truly remarkable. Grand Duke Alexander wrote of it, "It was not a pose, a desire to show off, but a sincere feeling of mercy that drove her to visit her husband's assassin in his cell." Shortly after her husband's assassination, St. Elizabeth became a nun. She continued to help the poor and establish a monastery. Using her wealth, she also built a hospital, a pharmacy, and an orphanage. She became abbess of the convent. St. Elizabeth and the sisters continued to help the sick, the poor, and the orphans. Her virtue is such that Vladimir Lenin knew her good works undermined the Bolshevik Revolution. He wrote when Elizabeth was martyred, "Virtue with the crown on it is a greater enemy to the world revolution than 100 tyrant czars." In 1918, St. Elizabeth, along with the rest of the royal family, were martyred by the Bolsheviks. It was reported that when the communists threw St. Elizabeth into a mine shaft, it was reported that she was heard singing hymns at the bottom of the mine shaft, although facing certain death. Her faith in the resurrection strengthened her again. St. Elizabeth's relics were eventually moved to Beijing and then to the Holy Land, out of communist hands, and were placed in the beautiful church of St. Mary Magdalene in Gethsemane. Her soul now enjoys paradise, while her body awaits the general resurrection from the dead. Christ is risen. If you'd like to learn more about St. Elizabeth, you could check out this book, The Grand Duchess Elizabeth of Russia, New Martyr of the Communist Yoke, by Miller. Or, for maybe kids, there's this nice book, Holy New Martyr Elizabeth and Grand Duchess of Russia. Kalistru is the authoress. Christ is risen. God bless you.